Hello, and welcome to the final installment of Nutrition 101. I hope that you've all enjoyed the ride, and today we're going to finish up our discussion of life cycles by first discussing the childhood years and adolescent years and the maturation of the human body, and then, of course, a fitting ending, we will talk about the aging process and the ways that you might be able to take steps to improve your health later in life and ease the effects of aging and help yourself feel healthy and virile well into your September years. So the first thing we're going to start with, we ended last time talking about toddlers and the ways in which you can start to introduce solid food to a baby and the psychology around planning proper nutrition and meals and getting your child to accept food. Now this continues on into childhood, which we define as the period between about 4 and 8 years of age. Before this, the child is considered to be a toddler and has slightly different needs. And then after this, around the age of 9, is when sexual dimorphism starts to set in and we start to distinguish between boys and girls in a nutritional sense. And so we call this the onset of adolescence, which really starts to truly take hold when puberty happens around 11 or 12 years of age. So the first stage, children tend to need a lot more protein than adults do because they are growing, and as we learned, protein is responsible for most of the tissue growth in our body. They also need high amounts of calcium and iron because with this growth comes things like bone growth and calcification, as well as the synthesis of blood cells, which would require calcium and iron. In addition, children tend to be significantly more active than adults, which means that they have higher energy requirements, which should in general be satisfied by carbohydrates. However, they want to be simple and complex carbohydrates rather than sugars or processed foods. And children, despite being much smaller than adults, need nearly as much as water as adults do. The brain is developing during this time, which means that healthy fats are needed. And because they're not adults, they are much more sensitive to and should avoid things like caffeine or toxic substances such as alcohol, which are significantly more dangerous to a developing brain than an adult's brain. In general, you want to limit consumption of sugar to special occasions to avoid generating things like insulin, insensitivity, and diabetes. And as a child ages, their food needs obviously increase in magnitude. Between the ages of 2 and 3, you might need 1 cup of fruits, 2 cups of vegetables, 3 ounces of grain, 2 ounces of meat or beans, 2 cups of milk, and 3 tablespoons of oil. This increases by about 50% between the ages of 4 and 8. And it increases another 50% between the ages of 9 and 13. And this is where the needs of females and males start to diverge a bit. Males in general need slightly more calorie intake than females do. This has to do with the generally larger amount of muscle mass in bodies that contain testosterone. And then between the ages of 14 and 18, the needs don't really increase that much. However, the caloric needs from carbohydrates tend to increase slightly. Now, it's, as always, important to establish healthy eating habits with your child. It may take up to 50 introductions of a new food for it to be accepted. And you should start with one food at a time in order to avoid overwhelming the child. And it's always important to honor the child's preferences when it comes to food because children tend to be very opinionated and more independent than we give them credit for. And they will choose foods based on texture, color, and appearance. So it's in your best interest to offer them choices, but within a boundary so that you can ensure that they're getting adequate nutritional content, but that they're also getting to eat something that they like. Another thing to remember is that they are still children, so giving them a lot of food at once can be overwhelming. We stick to the rule of 1 tablespoon of food per year of life, and that's a fairly good metric throughout the childhood years. Another thing that children do is they learn through participation. So having them participate in meal preparation encourages healthy eating. If you can find something for them to do that's either not dangerous or simple so that they don't mess it up, they'll feel like they're a part of the process, and they'll make them, in general, more inclined to participate in the eating of the food itself. Another thing that you want to try to plan is healthy snacks, because children are a lot more active than adults are, meaning that they need to get calories, especially from complex carbohydrates, throughout the day between meals. But you want to discourage mindless snacking, because this can encourage compulsive eating habits later in life, which generally leads to obesity. Another thing to watch out for is sugary beverages tend to cause dental cavities, or also known as dental caries. So you want to give them water to drink at meals, or if preferred, a little bit of lemon or lime juice. However, you want this to be fairly diluted, because lemon and lime juice are quite acidic and will rot your teeth out if you drink them undiluted. Eating meals together at least once a day helps create healthy eating habits, because the children establish a routine, and then when they are not with their family, they have a tendency to desire healthier foods. Taste is stronger in children, so you don't want to give them something that's really heavily peppered or spiced, because they will probably reject it outright, having a flavor that is too strong for their palate. And another common mistake that people make is forcing their child to eat everything on their plate. This sets a bad standard for both the psychological aspect of eating, because it creates stress, and it teaches a child not to listen to their own body, and which will give them signals when they're done eating, and then it can also cause them to compulsively eat as an adult, because whenever they take more food than they can eat, they feel pressure by unseen forces to consume all of it. So we had a food skills for infants, and there is an additional food skill development in preschool children. So between the ages of 1 and 2 years, the large muscles are starting to develop, and this child probably has the capability to use a short spoon and will start to help feed themselves. They can lift drinks. They can lift things, foods and drinks from a table and drink from a cup, and they start to be able to manipulate their food mechanically, such as scrubbing, tearing, breaking, or dipping. By 3 years of age, that's when the medium hand muscles start to develop, and they gain the ability to use a fork, because they now have the manual dexterity to spear their food. This is where they start to feed themselves independently, and they may even do some more complex activities and mechanical manipulation of food, such as wrapping, pouring, mixing, shaking, or spreading. And they start to maybe be able to crack nuts without supervision, although I don't know many adults that can crack nuts without supervision. So by 4 years of age, the small finger muscles have developed, and now the child is capable of using most utensils as well as napkins, and they can do things like rolling, juicing, mashing, or peeling of foods. They can crack eggshells. And by age 5, there's the fine coordination of fingers and hands has developed, and that's when they become capable of doing things like measuring, grinding, grating, and cutting. Of course, using a dull knife, and using things like kitchen tools such as egg beaters. Obviously, these estimates are approximate. Normal children develop at their own pace, and it's important to keep that in mind and not force progress in areas where a child might be lacking. So, between the ages of 4 and 8, their rapid growth period slows down, but it obviously doesn't stop. You can expect an average gain of 2 to 4 inches a year. This is a period when encouraging physical activity will set a standard later in life for an active child. The estimated energy requirement of a child varies according to age and body weight and level of active activity, just like with adults. But in general, the needs for most nutrients increase during this time period. Uh, by the ages of 8 or 9, I mentioned before, the sexual maturation begins, and that is when we start to separately define daily reference intake values for boys and girls. So, in terms of the macronutrients, the total fat intake should gradually drop off to a level closer to the adult fat intake. So when you're very small, you need a lot of fat to build tissue. But by the time you're about 8 years old, you should only be getting between 25 and 35% of your total energy from fat. Again, 130 grams of carbohydrate is pretty standard for even most adults, but that is considered to be the bare minimum for a healthy adult. 14 grams of fiber per 1,000 calories, again, is about the same as an adult. If you were on a 2,000 calorie diet, you'd want to be getting between 25 and 30 grams of fiber. And 0.95 grams of protein per kilogram of body weight is a little bit higher than a sedentary adult would need, which is 0.8 grams of protein per kilogram of body weight, but is about on par with an active adult who is constantly breaking down and building up their muscles. Now, in terms of micronutrients, you should be able to get plenty of micronutrients into your child by encouraging them to consume adequate fruits and vegetables. These are things like vitamin A, C, and E, as well as fiber and potassium. There's something called milk displacement, where the child doesn't drink enough milk or calcium-rich foods, which tends to also lead their diet to be low in other nutrients. So if you remember, vitamin A, E, and D are fat-soluble vitamins, which could be present in milk. And if you're not getting milk, you're probably not getting a lot of those either. The recommended daily allowance for iron and zinc increases during this period. And this is a subject of some controversy, but it's generally accepted by the medical community that fluoride is necessary in the diet, and therefore it is often added to municipal water supplies. However, if it is not, then fluoride supplements might be needed in order to prevent premature tooth decay. And the fluid needs of children are between 5 and 8 cups of beverages each day, which includes water, but the exact amount depends on the activity and the weather. So these beverages should be free of caffeine as well as added sugars. And if you follow the USDA daily food plan, this will in general meet the nutrient requirements for preschoolers. Now, once you've gotten into the prepubescent ages, that are also known as the tweens, between about 9 and 12 years of age, this is when they show signs of puberty, which of course occurs at different ages and rates. But this is the point at which you can expect a weight gain of about 10 pounds or more per year. Despite this weight gain, the body mass index should generally stay within the normal range. Now, they're gaining weight, but they're also getting taller, so this might not be a difficult proposition, although this is a time when many children develop obesity. But this is also an age where the child will develop more self-sufficiency in their food choices, which highlights the importance of establishing these routines early on, because it gets way more difficult once you get into school and you start experiencing things like peer pressure. But you can generally accomplish this by engaging in regular family meals. Now, preteens vary widely in their calorie needs depending on age, gender, and physical activity level, but are generally close to adult levels. So a girl about the age of 9 needs between 1,400 and 1,800 calories a day, increasing to between 1,600 and 2,200 calories at the age of 12, whereas a male child might need 1,600 to 2,000 calories at age 9, or 1,800 to 2,400 calories at age 12. And this is also the period where children will experience growth spurts, as well as developing body image issues from an increased awareness of their body. And they may have learned to be concerned with fat and begin to develop disordered eating. big aspect of unhealthful food choices is peer pressure. Body image is another major one. But planning and preparing and eating meals together generally makes families more successful at promoting food choices, and the increased frequency of these family meals reduces the risk for disordered eating, substance abuse, and depression. So, eat together, eat better is the slogan. Another issue that is prevalent among children, especially in children of low-income families or in the developing world, is iron deficiency anemia. It's generally fairly difficult to obtain enough iron in your diet unless you're eating meat or animal products. And even if you are, they can tend to be low in iron if they're not prepared properly. Also, children with poor appetites or erratic eating behaviors may need iron supplements because they can't get enough iron from the food that they're eating. Now, this iron deficiency anemia can be very severe, but at the very least, it can cause behavioral, cognitive, motor delays, and impaired immunity. There are 16 million children faced with food and hunger insecurity in the U.S. alone, which is part of the reason that we have things like the school lunch program and the school breakfast program, because without adequate breakfast, children just can't concentrate or pay attention. Your brain doesn't have enough carbohydrates to function properly, and even if it did, it probably doesn't have enough B vitamins. This impaired nutrient status can also blunt a children's immune response, so make them more susceptible to being sick and more likely to miss school. And then psychosocial health is associated with food insecurity for the reasons that I just explained, but also because there's a certain amount of bullying and shaming that goes on in among children of wealthy parents as opposed to children of unwealthy parents. And so we have a number of government programs that can help this, but I think it's fairly well understood that these don't quite fill the gap and could stand to be improved. So students who go to school have access to things like school breakfasts, which are meant to optimize nutrient intake and avoid behavioral learning problems from hunger in the classroom. However, there is no monitoring for the adequacy of food eaten, and oftentimes there are soft drinks and snack foods sold in schools that children take advantage of in lieu of the healthy choices that might be available. As well as another problem is with school lunches, which tend to supply fairly low quality fruits and vegetables, and this leads children to eat just the high fat components of the school lunch and leave the vegetables behind. Now, this could be mitigated with increasing options. However, many schools are strapped for funding, and so this tends not to happen. This is a diagram showing school lunch patterns for different ages. So if basically they increase the portions if you are in grade school versus if you're in preschool. They have things like lean meat, poultry or fish, cheese, large eggs, cooked dry beans or peas, peanut butter, yogurt, peanuts, soy nuts, or tree nuts, all in the same category. As we learned in this class, all of these things have fairly different nutrient profiles, and which one is consumed can have an effect on which nutrients the child is getting. And then they have one slot dedicated to vegetables and or fruits, which is usually just fruit cocktail and like mixed carrots and peas or something like that. I didn't know a lot of people in school that were particularly enticed by these options, but nobody really seemed to care. And then they always give you some kind of white bread. Now, it's generally agreed in the nutrition and school lunch community that schools need better nutrition standards. But, of course, everything revolves around getting money from Congress, which turns out to be like pulling teeth. So it would take about an extra 50 cents to $1 per meal to get school lunches properly nutritive and, I would say, desirable to consume. However, last year, Congress only gave schools 6 cents more because I guess they needed to buy more bombs. The other issue is that actually preparing good food in a healthy way takes more than fresh ingredients, which in and of themselves tend to be more expensive and less readily available. But it also requires a well-trained school lunch staff to prepare the food, and it requires the technology to maintain the freshness of those ingredients, such as refrigerators, and it requires the tools to prepare them, such as cutting boards and sharp knives. So, I mentioned before the idea of promoting healthy snacking in a child. Now, the way that you can come up with healthy snacks for your child is to try to select 2 or more foods from different food groups so that you can create variety and nutrient balance in your snacks. Now, there are obviously a near infinite number of combinations, so you can get pretty creative with these. You want to, in general, include grain products in your snack because they tend to be filling, because they have fiber and carbohydrates in them. So things like cereal with fruit and milk is a good snack, or crackers and cheese that has carbohydrates and protein and fat in it, as well as calcium and other minerals. Whole grain toast is good because it has a lot of vitamins in it, and then peanut butter has a lot of protein, it has polyunsaturated fats, and it has some vitamins. Popcorn is better for you than a lot of people tend to realize, and even if you put cheese on it, it's pretty good for you. And then oatmeal raisin cookies with milk hits a lot of bases. Oatmeal is good for you. Raisins are good for you. The fact that it's a cookie is somewhat mitigated by the presence of the oatmeal, and then the milk brings it all around with fat-soluble vitamins, healthy fats, and protein. You can also do something like cut up fresh raw vegetables. These are, in general, pretty good snacks by themselves, but they can also be combined with other food groups, like celery with peanut butter is a common one that I had as a kid, or like some vegetables like broccoli, cauliflower, or carrot sticks with some kind of lean dairy dip. You can also give them fruits, either fresh, dried, or juiced, and you can combine those with other foods, so like apples and cheese, or bananas and peanut butter, or peaches with yogurt, or trail mix. And then there are meat and meat alternatives, so you can give nachos with refried beans and cheese. Tuna on crackers is a good one, or deli meat on bread, which is basically just a sandwich, but it can be a small sandwich if that's what your child prefers. And then you can always give a child milk or some milk product, and is a good choice as a beverage for snacks because it helps give them a caloric, nutrient-dense beverage that also provides them fluids. So we've examined the process of growing in childhood, and as you move into adolescence, the needs begin to change again, and as well as the needs for men and women becoming different. So we generally consider adolescence to extend between the onset of puberty to about 18 years of age. Some people finish adolescence a little bit early, some people finish it a little late. But during puberty, the secondary sexual characteristics develop, and the capacity for reproduction develops. And during this phase, in general, children tend to become less responsive to parental guidance. And despite this, most adolescents will successfully navigate the challenges and mature into healthy adults. So you might start experiencing a growth spurt between the ages of 10 and 11 for girls, or 12 to 13 for boys, and this will lead to, on average, a 20 to 25% increase in height. Most girls reach almost full height by the onset of menstruation, also known as menarche, and boys can continue to grow until early adulthood. There is something called the growth plate or the epiphyseal plate in your bones. This is where bone growth occurs, and this ceases at the end of adolescence. During this period, weight and body composition also change, so you might go from a situation where you have mostly lean muscle and baby fat, and you could grow significantly, burn off a lot of that fat, and build more toned muscle. A big feature of the teenage years is that teens need a lot of energy because they are growing a lot and they tend to be fairly active. Girls, in addition, have increased iron and folic acid needs, and teens will generally absorb 100% of the calcium that they consume because they are building bones and trying to achieve peak bone density. However, this can be a problem because many teens will choose soda over calcium-rich drinks, and soda has the effect of actually leaching calcium out of your body. Another thing that teens need that they don't probably get enough of is fiber. And this is possibly due to the fact that their peer influence will generally outweigh yours, but it could also be a result of some effect called a gastrophysical effect, where the food that you desire is governed by things other than the flavor or healthiness of it. As you get older and reach the end of adolescence, you might not have as much of a calorie need. Girls tend to need about 25% less calories than boys, making nutrient density even more important for them. This is because men tend to have higher muscle mass than women do, and this generally just consumes more calories to maintain. Now, teens tend to get about twice as much protein as they need, and this can be made worse by uneducated gym teachers or coaches who encourage bad training techniques for muscle building. This tends to cause other nutrients to suffer in the diet because if you consume a lot of protein, it doesn't tend to have a lot of other nutrients bundled with it. So encouraging consumption of whole grains, whole fruits and veggies, these provide fiber, calories, and initiate satiety, as well as giving phytochemicals to protect against oxidative damage. Now, once again, caffeine remains fairly dangerous for children to consume, but as you become a teenager, it might become more acceptable to have some caffeine. However, an excess of caffeine can be bad for you. And this is a picture of the growth plate in a bone. It's located here, and around the end of bone growth, this fuses and no longer causes bone growth to occur. Now, macronutrient requirements for teenagers, just summarized. Once again, the energy needs for adolescents is based on gender, age, activity level, height, and weight. You want them to get between 25 and 35% of their total energy from fat, but less than 10% of their total energy from saturated fat. And they're pretty much on par with adults, getting 45 to 65% of their calories from carbohydrates, and they have roughly the same protein needs as an adult, but they need just as much fiber as an adult as well. Now, during this time, calcium intake is incredibly important in order to achieve peak bone density. So both boys and girls need to get 1,300 milligrams a day, which is about 300 milligrams more per day than an adult needs. The iron needs are also relatively high, 11 milligrams a day for boys and 15 milligrams a day for girls. Vitamin A is critical for rapid growth and development because it helps prevent oxidative damage to tissues, which allows them to build themselves quicker. And an important thing to remember is that supplements are generally not a substitute for a balanced and healthful diet, especially for children. As you get older, supplementation might become necessary, but it shouldn't be necessary for a child. except under extenuating circumstances. Now, teenagers need significantly more fluid than adults do, and it can even increase more with higher activity levels. So boys might need 11 cups of water a day, with girls needing about 10 cups of water a day, and becomes more and more important to have pure water as a beverage rather than just juices or milk. And this is a diagram showing the average consumption of milk versus soft drinks by children and teens in the 70s, 80s, and 90s. In the 1970s, milk was consumed in higher quantities than soft drinks. In the 80s, that number leveled out pretty much, and then in the 1990s, the soft drink consumption went above milk consumption by a significant margin. This could also explain the rise in childhood obesity. I mentioned gastrophysics before. This is the idea that foods you choose are influenced by more than taste. Now, there are some weird psychosomatic ones, like sweetness being associated with certain shapes of food, as well as sour and bitter being associated with other shapes, like lemon wedges and cookies. Another big one is color. So there's a lot of artificial colorings in most packaged foods these days, and it can cause our brains to associate certain flavors with certain colors, especially ones in unnatural hues, like Cheetos. And then the difference between smell and taste can also change the way that food is consumed. This is generally mitigated in the food industry by adding lots of sugar, which makes everything taste good. Other interesting facts: if you're listening to music, we tend to chew to the beat. Things that are orange or red tend to make you eat faster. This is a sort of a well-known psychological effect that red is sort of an agitating color and is associated with aggression. Interesting one, matte packaging is often seen as healthier than glossy packaging because we associate glossy plastic with industrial processed foods, whereas we associate matte packaging with things like paper bags that you might get from like the local grocery store. And in general, as we get older, it becomes more difficult to accept new foods due to predispositions of taste. Now, during this period is when some teenagers might develop IBS, which we discussed is often a symptom of FODMAP consumption. And to remind you, FODMAP stands for fermentable oligosaccharides, disaccharides, monosaccharides, and polyols. Fermentable things like fibers. Oligosaccharides are fructans and galactans, which are modifications of they're polysaccharides that are made up of fructose and galactose. Disaccharides, specifically lactose. Monosaccharides like fructose and polyols are generally sugar alcohols, many of which are used as artificial sweeteners. And IBS can cause symptoms of chronic gas, bloating, and pain after eating. And if you have this, you want to rule out SIBO, which is the overgrowth of negative bacteria in the small intestine, which you can do by eliminating FODMAP foods and then slowly reintroducing them to see which one, if anything, triggers your IBS. And this is a table showing this equation that we used in our energy balance lecture to calculate the caloric needs of an adult man or woman. However, there's a special one for children, which is slightly different. So if you are doing your diet project on a kid, you might want to use this formula instead. Now, childhood obesity is a big problem in this country right now, but many parents go about fixing this problem in the wrong ways. So generally, it's best to provide psychological support to an obese child and not talk about dieting all the time, but instead try to encourage good health. It's important to get the family all on the same page with this. It's also important to distinguish between the hunger and desire for attention. which requires you to talk and listen to them and help have them participate in meals. If you also institute a pattern of doing activities together and making good food choices together, and trying to limit their snacking and try to eliminate eating while doing activities like gaming, playing TV, or other things like that. This can eliminate unconscious eating from their diet, which could make a big difference in the level of obesity. And here's another fun graph showing the prevalence of childhood obesity in the populations ages 6 to 11 years and ages 12 to 19 years. In 1970s, 1980s, and 1990s, we were down around 5% for both groups in the 70s, which went up to about 10% in the 80s, and was up to the 15% in the 90s. I think we're up to somewhere between 25 and 30% now. Now, children are susceptible to many of the same chronic diseases as adults with obesity, one of them being high cholesterol. So, generally, cholesterol levels below 170 milligrams per deciliter is considered normal, with an LDL level below 110 milligrams per deciliter. A borderline value is between 170 and 199 for total cholesterol, and 110 and 129 for LDL cholesterol. And it's considered high if it's above 200 total cholesterol and above 130 LDL cholesterol. They're also susceptible to hypertension, which is high blood pressure, and this gives the lists of the diastolic pressure for different age groups and what is considered mild, moderate, or severe hypertension. I'm not going to read all these values off, but you can read them in your own time. And then there's a BMI chart for girls and boys. For some reason, this chart is a little bit blurrier than the one for the boys, but you can see BMI, or healthy BMI, dips down in the childhood years and then starts to swing back up around puberty when we start to hit our growth spurt, as well as the range of what is considered healthy, obese, and overweight widening. Now you can see here for boys, it shows the effect of aging and how the body fat content and BMI can be considered different in different age periods. So a 10-year-old boy with a BMI of 23 is in the obese category. However, the same BMI 5 years later would be considered a healthy weight. So this is a result of the fact that during this period, a decent amount of growth happens, as well as increasing in height, which changes the energy requirements of the body. Now, as with adults, physical activity is key to maintaining a healthy lifestyle. The American Institute of Medicine recommends aerobic physical activity for at least an hour each day, and includes bone and muscle strengthening activities at least 3 days a week. And it tends to encourage non-competitive, fun, and structured activities in ways that allow self-pacing. So competitive sports are really bad for the health of children. I remember in school lots of fairly young teenagers giving themselves permanent injuries from pushing themselves very hard in order to be competitive with other schools at the encouragement of their coaches. This is in general a bad thing and probably should be discouraged. Now, it'll be difficult to get your child to engage in physical activity if you yourself as the parent and other adult role models are not engaging in physical activity. And so you can engage in things like shared activities such as ball games or bicycle rides. You generally want to limit sedentary time in front of the television to less than 2 hours a day. And if you are playing electronic games that require you to move, like virtual tennis or step aerobics or dancing or other active simulations, are generally considered fine. And I mentioned before the BMI of the 10-year-old boy and the 15-year-old boy being the same, but one being considered obese and one being considered healthy. This means that an overweight child can catch up to their weight as they grow taller without restricting their food or nutrient intake. This now, if they are engaging in this physical activity, this can help them acquire motor skills and muscle strength. It can help them establish good sleep patterns. They can develop self-esteem, which lowers their stress level. It'll optimize their bone mass and enhance their cardiovascular and respiratory function. And here are some examples of some physical activities that are suitable for children and adolescents. Things such as moderate intensity aerobic activity, like for children, things like active recreation such as hiking, skateboarding, or rollerblading, as well as bicycle riding and brisk walking. Adolescents might be able to handle more intense active recreation like canoeing, and the other activities that were listed before, as well as brisk walking. This is the point at which they can do housework and yard work, like pushing a lawnmower or sweeping or raking, and also games that require catching and throwing like baseball or softball. Vigorous intensity aerobic activities for children are games that involve running like tag, bicycle riding or jumping rope, martial arts like karate, running, such sports as soccer, ice or field hockey, basketball, swimming or tennis, or cross-country skiing. And then adolescence, all the same things, except obviously at the intensity level that an adolescent would do them at. Muscle strength activities for children are things like tug of war, or modified push-ups, resistance exercises, or rope or tree climbing, sit-ups, swinging on playground equipment. Adolescents might do some of these same activities, but they also might do things like rock climbing a climbing wall or rock climbing, as well as actually doing like a exercise routine on machines in a gym. And they can start to do real push-ups and pull-ups as well. Then bone strengthening activities for children are things like hopscotch, as well as hopping, skipping, and jumping rope, running, gymnastics, basketball, volleyball, or tennis. And then adolescents, they can do many of those same things, but they're probably not playing hopscotch anymore. So that's childhood and adolescence. And now we move into adulthood and the later years. And since we spent most of the class talking about the nutrient needs of people between the ages of about 20 and 30, we're going to skip over those people and go right into people over the age of about 40. So this graph shows the population growth in the United States between 1960 and 1990. So the total population growth was about 39%. However, 13% of that was people under 25. 89%. I'm sorry, that's a misreading of that graph. People under 25 have increased by 13%. People over 65 have increased by 89%, and people over 85 have increased by 231%. Now, the age of reckoning for what we'll call the negative effects of aging is between the ages of about 40 and 60. This is the period of time in which it will become apparent how well you've cared for yourself. This is when you start to develop the needs for things like reading glasses. You start to experience hair loss or thinning, graying hair, decrease of kidney function, osteoarthritis, which may alter your activity level, lowered sex hormones, which can lead to perimenopause for women and andropause for men, lowered fertility, loss of skin elasticity, and wrinkling. Another thing that starts to happen is something called sarcopenia, where the percent of body fat to percent muscle changes, and we tend to lose about 10% muscle mass every decade. Now, you can also suffer changes in your sensory perception, and we call the collection of age-related processes that increase our risk of disability, disease, and death. We call this senescence. This is caught because our systems begin to slow and degenerate, which can be accompanied by declined odor, taste, and visual perception, which we call dysgeusia, which is abnormal taste perception. You can experience loss of visual acuity, and you will begin to require more and more the support of your family and friends to help with food selection and preparation. Now, there are other things that will happen. You can experience a decline in gastrointestinal function. So there's something called xerostomia, which is a declined salivary production. There's dysphagia, which is a difficulty swallowing foods. There's achloridria, which is low gastric hydrochloric acid production, which will limit your calcium, iron, folate, and vitamin B12 absorption. Your gut microbiota will change, which is we call an aging gut, which can result in increased inflammation, decreased immune function of the GI tract, and impaired functioning of gut mucosal cells. And all of these things combined can lead to a rejection of food, which we can sometimes call the anorexia of aging, because food just doesn't taste good anymore, and you therefore might not be eating enough of it. Another thing that develops in older people, if they didn't have it already, is lactose intolerance. Most people become lactose intolerant in their later years. So, because of the increase in body fat to muscle ratio, we can start to experience something called sarcopenic obesity, where we have decreased muscle and lean tissue, a decreased production of hormones such as testosterone and growth hormone, as well as a decline in our bone mineral density. And this can be mitigated by adequate dietary intake and regular physical activity, such as strength and resistance training. This can help maintain muscle mass and bone strength. However, it can't completely eliminate it. So here is a diagram that we looked at when we talked about calcium and the minerals of bones. Between the ages of 0 and about 30, we are increasing in bone density, and we reach peak bone density around the age of 30, after which it begins to decline, and then in the your 50s, women will hit menopause, and so their calcium status can decline even further. And if you get too low, you can go into something called the fracture zone, where you're very susceptible to bone breakage because of the limited amount of calcium in your bones. Obviously, men don't experience menopause, so they experience a steady decline in calcium, but not nearly as severe. Organ function also declines, so this causes us to be less adaptable to environmental or physiological stressors. Kidneys become less capable of concentrating waste. Our livers become less efficient in breaking down drugs and toxins. The pancreas begins to decline in its ability to regulate blood glucose. Our bladder control may decline, leading to incontinence. Connective tissues and blood vessels will become stiff and less pliable. We call this tissue calcification. And the number of neurons in the brain can decrease, which will lead to impaired memory, reflexes, coordination, and learning ability. Now, when we talk about causes of death due to nutrition concerns, I've mentioned this graph before when we talked about when we were in the fats chapter. I talked about heart disease being the number one killer of Americans. Now, many people who die from these things die at an older age, because that's when your body becomes less capable of sustaining any kind of stress that you're putting on it. So people who die of heart disease usually die in their 40s or 50s or 60s, as well as with cancer and strokes. Notice that these are the three biggest killers of people, and they are heavily related to nutrition. Other things are like chronic obstructive lung disease or unintentional injuries, which tend to be alcohol related. Pneumonia is obviously not dietary related, but diabetes is. And then other things are HIV, suicide, and chronic liver disease. Suicide and chronic liver disease are also heavily related to alcohol consumption. Now, breaking down these statistics a little bit more, heart attacks are generally more common in men, but women are more likely to die within a year after a heart attack. And women tend to get heart disease 7 to 10 years later than men. Strokes, women have fewer strokes, but they're also more likely to die from them than men. And this is probably because they are older than men when they have a stroke. Depression is twice as common in women. Migraines are 3 times more common in women. Hearing loss is more common in men, most likely because of the lack of ear protection around heavy machinery in the workforce. Nearsightedness or myopia is more common in women through the age of 60. Irritable bowel syndrome is more common in women. Cancer is generally more common in women, especially lung, kidney, bladder, pancreas. Lung, kidney, bladder, pancreas cancer are more common in men. Thyroid cancer is more common in women, as well as obviously like breast cancer. Osteoporosis, we've mentioned several times, is significantly more common in women, as well as rheumatoid arthritis. Gout is more common in men. Lupus is 9 times more common in women, and fibromyalgia is 9 times more common in women. Now, there are a number of age-related changes that you probably can't do anything about. These are things like hair graying, hair loss or balding, drying and wrinkling of the skin, impairment of near vision, reduced taste and smell sensitivity, reduced touch sensitivity, slowed reactions, slowed mental function, diminished visual memory, menopause, loss of fertility, and loss of joint elasticity. However, some of these might be able to be mitigated by proper B vitamin consumption. However, there's no guarantee there. Now, there are a number of changes you can prevent. Prevent means generally exercise, consumption of nutrient-dense foods, reduction of stress, tooth care, and avoiding sun damage to the skin. So things like wrinkling can be avoided somewhat by avoiding sun damage. Mental confusion can often be mitigated by proper consumption of B vitamins. Raised blood pressure can be definitely prevented by exercise and reduction of obesity. The increase of resting heart rate can also be mitigated by having good cardiovascular health and lowered blood pressure. The reduced breathing capacity and oxygen uptake can be mitigated by engaging in cardiovascular exercise. That you can also lower your blood cholesterol in this way, as well as by eating a healthier diet. You can also mitigate the effects of slowed energy metabolism and your decreased maximum work rate. And you can also slow down your loss of sexual functioning and joint flexibility by engaging in physical activities which fill your system with hormones and also keep your joints moving properly. If you take good care of your teeth, you probably may not lose them as early or at all, and they can prevent things like gum disease. And if you get enough calcium in your diet and exercise enough, you can decrease the amount of bone loss. And this might also help with digestive problems. So I mentioned before there can be gastrointestinal issues related to aging. Your intestines will lose muscle strength, which can result in sluggish motility, which will lead to constipation. This can also lead to the inflammation of the stomach, and as well as abnormal bacterial growth, and reduced acid output will impair digestion and absorption of nutrients. And pain and fear of choking may cause food avoidance or reduced intake, which I mentioned is also known as anorexia of aging. Now, reduced hormone production can mean a lot of things. So insulin is a hormone. So if your pancreas secretes less of it, your cells will become less responsive to glucose, which will cause lowered glucose metabolism, also known as insulin resistance. This can also be testosterone or estrogen, which will affect muscle mass and calcium status. Tooth loss, gum disease, and reduced salivary input can impede chewing and swallowing, which will reduce the effectiveness of digestion. It also increases the risks of choking and the pain of eating, which could cause avoidance of hard-to-chew foods, which may also cause the avoidance of healthy foods. The diminishment of sensory perception such as the diminishment of sight and smell, can make food shopping and preparation difficult. The diminishment of smell and taste may also reduce appetite. This is still an active area of research, though. Weight loss and decline in lean body mass, also known as sarcopenia, will lead to lowered energy requirements, but this obviously is not necessarily a good thing, because if you have just fat and no muscle in your body, then it will make you significantly weaker. But this can be preventable or reversible through exercise. In general, your energy needs will decrease even if you are exercising. This will make it more important for nutrient density to be high. The difficulty chewing and swallowing will result in a consumption of less fiber overall, as well as less peristalsis in the intestines, so constipation can be likely. The protein needs will actually increase in relation to your calorie needs. It's because you need to work harder to keep your muscle mass high. Absorption of vitamin A increases. Now, vitamin A is important for antioxidant protection of tissue, and this becomes more important as we age. I mentioned the potential for malabsorption of vitamin B12 because of low stomach acid. You also generally experience a lack of thirst as you get older, which can increase your urine output and make dehydration likely. And remember that dehydration is a common cause of confusion. So sometimes you may think somebody is suffering from dementia, but they're actually suffering from dehydration or B vitamin deficiency. Iron status is something that actually improves for women after menopause. So most deficiency is linked to chronic blood loss or low stomach acid output. So remember, stomach acid helps us absorb iron. Antacids are often consumed in higher quantities by older people because they've developed things like gastric reflux. And so they might be taking antacids or other medications which can aggravate iron deficiency. But consumption of vitamin C and meat can enhance the absorption of iron. Now, zinc is something that may be inadequate, as well as the absorption declining. However, your zinc needs increase as you get older, so you might need to take special care to get enough. Medications often can interfere with absorption of zinc, and a deficiency can suppress your appetite, which can obviously concatenate into a whole series of problems. In general, especially because of things like lactose intolerance and avoidance of sun damage, calcium and vitamin D intakes may be low. Vitamin D prehormones in the skin diminish, and there's less exposure to sunlight due to skin cancer concerns, so there's less vitamin D conversion in the body, which increases the risk of osteoporosis, because if you remember, we talked about vitamin D being very important in calcium metabolism. And here's a summary of the nutrition recommendations that change with age. So you increase in your need of vitamin D from 600 IUs per day to about over 800 for adults over 70. The rationale for this is decreased bone density and decreased ability to synthesize vitamin D in the skin. You increase your need for calcium from 1,000 milligrams per day for most adults up to age 50 to 1,200 milligrams a day for women over 51 and males over 70. This is due to decreased absorption of dietary calcium, decreased bone density, which onsets earlier in women. You generally need less fiber, decreases 38 grams a day for males up to 51 to 30 grams a day for males 50 and older, and from 25 grams a day for women up to 51 to 21 grams a day for women over 51. This is correlated with the decreased calorie intake with aging. B6 needs increase in both men and women from 1.3 milligrams a day up to 51 to 1.7 milligrams per day for women and 1.5 milligrams a day for females over 50. And you need to start getting B12 from fortified foods or supplements as opposed to foods of animal origin because your body is less capable of absorbing it. This is important to maintain blood levels and to reduce homocysteine levels and to optimize immune function. And the need to supplement B12 is due to lower levels of stomach acid, which causes decreased absorption of B12. Women need less iron, so their needs go down from 18 milligrams a day before age 50 to 8 milligrams a day after 50. Men don't need to change their iron recommendations. It stays at 8 milligrams per day. This is due to cessation of menstruation in women. So older adults generally do benefit from multivitamins or multimineral supplements. Sometimes they might take single nutrient supplements like B12, calcium, or vitamin D alone. However, high-potency supplements still pose a risk. These still have the equal tendency to induce toxicity of any of these nutrients. Now, being overweight or obese increases the severity and consequences of osteoarthritis, as well as limiting mobility, which will generally cause functional declines in your daily activities. But weight loss can improve your functional status. I mentioned before sarcopenic obesity. This is picture shown in circle A is a adult in the prime of their life with a high muscle mass and a small amount of surface fat. But as we age, if measures are not taken to prevent it, the amount of muscle mass will decrease and be replaced by fat. And this is a flow chart showing how many of these health issues are interrelated. So obesity can put you at risk for some cancers, as well as gallbladder disease or atherosclerosis, which is clogged arteries, as well as diabetes. And diabetes and atherosclerosis can lead to stroke and heart attack, as well as hypertension. And this is another sort of flow chart showing the vicious cycle of overeating, which leads to obesity, which leads to enlarged fat cells, which leads to insulin resistance, which leads to type 2 diabetes, which leads to increased appetite, which leads to more overeating. Now, equally dangerous for elderly people is being underweight. This is because we have elderly people have fewer protein reserves available, which leads to a risk for poor wound healing and a depressed immune response. We sometimes refer to this as geriatric failure to thrive, or the dwindles, or the idea of somebody wasting away. And in general, you don't want, unless you're obese, you don't want to be losing weight as you get older. This can lead to a number of, this can be caused by a number of factors that are related to aging. So you might be on a lot of drugs that are limiting your appetite. Dysphagia, or the pain in swallowing. Dysgeusia, which is the reduced smell and taste. Dentition, which is loss of your teeth. Diarrhea can cause you to avoid foods that might upset your stomach. Depression generally reduces your appetite. Disease generally causes you to lose weight because it calls on energy reserves in your body. And then activity dysfunctions and dementia can also cause weight loss. Now, aging can also have an effect on our brains. So this is a list of a number of different brain functions and the nutrient that they are related to. So short-term memory is generally governed by B12, vitamin C, and vitamin E. Performance in problem-solving tests is governed by riboflavin, folate, B12, and vitamin C. Mental health is affected by thiamine, niacin, zinc, and folate. Cognition is affected by folate, B6, B12, iron, and vitamin E. Vision is affected by essential fatty acids as well as vitamin A. And neurotransmitter synthesis is related to tyrosine, tryptophan, and choline consumption. Remember, choline was one of the pseudovitamins in the B complex. Tryptophan is an amino acid. Can't remember what tyrosine is. So if care is not taken to take care of your brain as it ages, you can develop dementia, which has many causes, often vascular or medication related, but it can very easily be related to dietary concerns or alcoholism. And then there's also Alzheimer's disease, which, as far as we know, is related to something called a beta amyloid protein that forms a sort of plaque on our neurons made up of protein, which eventually destroys our brain. Now, you can pinpoint or predict malnutrition in an elderly person based on obvious and observable physical characteristics. So recent loss or gain of more than 6 pounds of weight can be an indicator of malnutrition, as well as the development of physical disabilities. If a person doesn't get enough sunlight exposure, if they've recently experienced bereavement from the death of a loved one, or depression or loneliness, or confusion, which can be related to B vitamins or water. Alcohol abuse generally malnourishes us intrinsically, as well as taking multiple medications. Now, long-term use of medication can cause malnutrition. Obviously, low food or fluid intake, the rejection of food, not keeping any food in the house, as well as rejection of fruits and vegetables, generally because they are difficult to chew. Another big one is not having enough money for food, or not having the knowledge of nutrition required to make good choices later in life. And this is why we have developed government food assistance programs for elderly people, such as congregate meals or Meals on Wheels, where they literally will deliver you a nutritionally complete meals for an entire week. This is generally a fairly good program. I know a number of people in my own family who are on Meals on Wheels. Now, a big one that I've mentioned a couple times now, but haven't really gone into any specifics about, is nutrient-drug interactions. So drugs can alter food intake in a number of ways. So they can alter your appetite. Things like amphetamines suppress your appetite. They can interfere with taste or smell. So things like methotrexate will change your sense of taste. Some medications will induce nausea or vomiting, like digitalis can do both of those things. Changing the oral environment, such as phenobarbital, which causes dry mouth, which will further cause further problems from reduced salivary output. Many drugs will irritate the GI tract, such as cyclophosphamide, which will induce mucosal ulcers. Some medications causes sores or inflammation in the mouth, like methotrexate. They can also change the acidity of the digestive tract, such as antacids, interfering with iron absorption. They can alter the digestive juices, so cimetidine can cause you to absorb more fat, which is not in general a very good thing if you're trying to build more lean body mass. Things like laxatives can change the motility of your digestive tract, which can cause malabsorption of many nutrients. Other things can inactivate enzyme systems. So neomycin can reduce lipase activity, which will in general reduce your ability to use fat for energy. They can also damage the mucosal cells, such as with chemotherapy, and they can bind to nutrients. So antacids will bind to phosphorus, which is an essential nutrient found everywhere in our bodies. And on the converse, some foods can alter drug absorption by changing the acidity of the digestive tract. So candy can change the acidity of your digestive tract, which will cause dissolving slow-acting asthma medication to dissolve too quickly. Can also stimulate the secretion of digestive juices, which can improve the absorption of some drugs. Because it causes the secretion of digestive enzymes. can also alter the rate of absorption of things like aspirin. So if you take aspirin with food, it is absorbed more slowly into your blood. Foods can also bind to drugs. So calcium will bind to tetracycline, which limits the drug absorption. And they can also foods can also compete for absorption sites in the intestines, like dietary amino acids, which interfere with a drug called levodopa. Drugs can interact with nutrients and alter your metabolism. Some drugs act as structural analogs, so anticoagulants and vitamin K can interfere with each other. They can also compete with each other for metabolic enzyme systems, like phenobarbital interferes with folate metabolism. And then they can also alter enzyme activity, which contributes to pharmacologically active substances. So monoamine oxidase inhibitors and tyramine interact with one another. Drugs can also alter your nutrient excretion, so they can alter reabsorption in the kidneys, such as a diuretic will increase the excretion of sodium and potassium. And they can also displace nutrients from their plasma protein carriers, like aspirin displacing folate. And then foods can can alter drug excretion by changing the acidity of the urine. A big example is vitamin C can alter urinary pH and limit the excretion of aspirin. This is a kind of a summary list of common drug-nutrient interactions. So things like antacids can decrease the absorption of iron, calcium, folate, and vitamin B12. Antibiotics can reduce the absorption of calcium as well as fat-soluble vitamins and reduce the production of vitamin K by gut bacteria, by killing the gut bacteria. Can also, antibiotic absorption can be interfered with by iron supplementation. Anticonvulsants can interfere with the activation of vitamin D. Anticoagulants or blood thinners can oppose the clotting activity of vitamin K, and vitamin E will magnify this effect. Antidepressants may cause weight gain as a result of increased appetite. Antiretroviral agents such as HIV and AIDS treatments can reduce the absorption of most nutrients. Aspirin decreases blood folate levels and increases the loss of iron due to gastric bleeding. Diuretics can increase urinary loss of potassium, sodium, calcium, and magnesium, whereas others can cause retention of potassium and other electrolytes depending on what type of diuretic it is. And then laxatives can increase fecal excretion of dietary fat, fat-soluble vitamins, calcium, and other minerals. And here's an interesting table giving foods that can limit the effectiveness of nicotine gum, which can be important if you're trying to quit smoking later in life. Things like apple juice, beer, ketchup, coffee, colas, grape juice, lemon lime soda, mustard, orange juice, pineapple juice, soy sauce, and tomato juice. I have no idea why that would be, but it's a table in a textbook, so it must have some credence behind it. Now, there are some theories about how you could possibly manipulate your diet to make yourself live longer. There is something called energy restriction that has been observed in animals to decrease oxidative stress and lead to a longer lifespan. And this principle can be applied to people as well. And there is something called the Calorie Restriction Society, which is a non-academic group that promotes low-calorie consumption by people in order to eliminate the effects of aging. So there's a graph here of calorie-restricted mice versus non-calorie-restricted mice, and restricting your calorie intake by 55%, or the mouse's calorie restriction in this sense versus the non-calorie restricted led to a fairly significant increase in lifespan. Now, that is somewhat of a shaky proposition because correlation does not imply causation. However, there might be something to it. It's very important to get enough protein and nutrients, but being overweight is a significantly bigger problem for you as you age. If you want to enact strategies to grow old in a healthful manner, you want to choose nutrient-dense foods as well as being physically active, with doing as wide a variety of physical activities as you can manage, practicing muscle strengthening as well as balance-related activities. And don't obviously push yourself too hard because then you can hurt yourself. You want to maintain an appropriate body weight and attempt to reduce stress as well as cultivate self-esteem, maintaining a positive attitude, managing your time wisely, knowing your limits, practice assertiveness, all of these fun things. For women, you might want to discuss estrogen replacement therapy because this can help mitigate the effects of osteoporosis. You might want to quit smoking if you smoke. Another important one is to continue trying to enjoy sex and learn ways of enhancing it, because a healthy sex life can increase your happiness level, as well as providing some cardiovascular exercise. Not drinking in excess, using drugs only as prescribed is always a good idea. Being extra careful to prevent accidents and not expect that you can always do exactly the same things as you did when you were younger. And you should expect to have at least decent vision and hearing throughout life and take steps to make that happen. Get glasses if you need it, which can actually help preserve your vision, because if you have the right glasses prescription, it can take stress off of your eyes, which will cause them to decline more slowly. The same with hearing. Taking care of your teeth, obtaining dentures if you don't have teeth, will help you continue to consume the right foods. Keep alert for confusion. I know it might be difficult to notice confusion if you're confused, but this can be a disease symptom or a symptom of malnutrition, and you should seek a diagnosis for that. If you are on medications, you should take them as prescribed and not self-prescribed medications or herbal remedies unless indicated to by somebody who knows what they're talking about. It's a good idea to try to control depression through activities and friendships and seek professional help if that can't happen. Drinking enough water is very important, just like for everybody else. Practicing mental skills such as cognition is important in keeping your mind sharp. So doing math problems and crossword puzzles, playing cards, reading, writing, imagining, and creating. Because mental skills will become even more important as your physical health declines. This next one is a bit shaky in the current economic climate, but making financial plans to ensure financial security. At this point, you're probably better off just having a good support structure around you. Accepting change is important. You need to work at recovering from losses and making new friends if your friends start to die, which is a bit morbid, but something that happens a lot is older people, they start to lose friends and they don't make new friends, and then they become very lonely. Spiritual health can mean a lot of things. It doesn't necessarily mean going into church and practicing religion, but having a strong set of personal values and engaging in activities that make your life meaningful is important to being healthy and desiring to continue living. Going out in the sun and fresh air as often as possible is generally considered healthy. Being socially active is, again, difficult right now because of COVID, but there are ways that you can still engage in some of these activities. But generally staying interested in life, having hobbies, spending time with grandchildren, taking trips. Gardening is a big one. Going to the movies is not a thing anymore, but you can always have a movie night with 2 or 3 of your closest friends sitting across the living room from one another. But it's important to try to enjoy your life because you only got one of them. Now, here's some exercise guidelines that you could use to maintain a good physical status. You don't want to necessarily go hard immediately, especially if you're going from a situation where you're not very physically active to one in which you need to be more. So you should start easy. Maybe make sure that you're active at least 5 minutes on most or all days. Use low weight for strength training and do small sets of repetitions. And if you're trying, you obviously want to try progressing to larger amounts, going up to 30 minutes a day for endurance exercises on almost every day, increasing your weight that you're lifting as able, and doing twice as many repetitions a couple times a week. Now, with endurance exercises and cardiovascular exercise, your maximum heart rate has declined, so you want to make sure that you're not breathing too hard, or you're not feeling dizzy or chest pain, because you can be at higher risk for a heart attack. With strength training exercises, breathing out as you contract and breathing in as you relax your muscles can help avoid things like hernias. Holding your breath is a really good way to hurt yourself while lifting. Balancing exercises are, things like yoga. You can feel free, if you're just starting out, to hold on to tables or chairs with one hand, eventually progressing onto not holding onto the table and closing your eyes while you're balancing. And it's helpful to try to incorporate balancing exercises with your strength exercises so that you can sort of kill two birds with one stone. And with stretching, you want to hold stretches for at least 10 seconds when you're first starting out, doing each one about 3 times. And then you move up to stretching for each stretch for 30 seconds and repeating each stretch 5 times. And you always want to stretch after strength and endurance exercises for about 20 minutes 3 times a week, using slow and steady movements and bending your joints slightly to avoid injury. And this is, we'll end with this little graphic here showing the USDA food guide, which is slightly modified for people as they age. This here, you want to get a decent amount of fruits and vegetables, and you want those to be about half of your diet. Slightly reduced amounts of grains. You want to make sure you get lower lactose versions of dairy products such as cheese and yogurt, as well as a decent variety of protein, as much of it containing iron as possible. And then you need a decent amount of fat in your diet in order to promote tissue health. And then, as always, getting enough fluids is incredibly important. So thank you for tuning in to this class. Hopefully these lectures have been helpful to you. Hopefully you guys have picked up enough information that the diet project is proving to be very easy. And there will be a quiz on this material, and then the final exam and the final project will all be due at the end of the semester. And then you'll have your grades by the 1st of January. This has been a pleasure for me, and hope you guys enjoy the rest of your winter.